Today we're going to talk about changing fractions into decimals. If you can divide with decimals in the quotient, you already know how to do it. Let's look at this fraction 3/4. This sign right here that tells the fraction separating the numerator and denominator is the exact same thing as the little box we make for division problems. Think of your dividend as your numerator and your divisor as your denominator. These symbols mean the same thing, because a fraction is really just an unfinished division problems. Now, does 4 go into 3? No. But since you all learned how to divide when there are decimals in your quotient, that should be no problem. So, we get to this point, and 4 goes into 3 0 times. 0 times 4 is 0. We do our subtraction, we get 3. What do we do next? Well, we raise that decimal up to the quotient and add a 0 to the dividend. Once we do that, we can then drop it, and then we see how many times 4 would go into 30, which would be 7 times. Do our multiplication and our subtraction, and we get 2. Well, we can then drop our 0 again. Drop our 0 again, and we get 20. 4 goes into 25 times. Our answer is 75 hundredths. So 3/4 is equal to 0 and 75 hundredths. Now, there are a couple special types of decimals. That decimals are not always going to end evenly when you get to the hundredth or thousandth place. Sometimes they go on forever. These are called non-terminating decimals. A special type of a non-terminating decimal just means that the decimal continues on forever. A special type of this is a repeating decimal. This means that it repeats in a pattern over and over again. So 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 on and on. One fraction that is commonly changed into a decimal is 1/3. 1/3, you could see, really, again, you take your numerator, you make it the dividend, and your denominator your divisor. 3 does not go into 1, so you put the decimal up, you add the 0, 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9, and you subtract it and you get 1. Then you drop that 0 and notice it's the same thing you had to divide it into before. Okay, well maybe it's just coincidence. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. It looks just like it did here, and you get 1. Then you drop another 0. You'll notice that that pattern is going to go on forever. If you keep getting the same number after you subtract each time, especially ones because you know you're bringing down a 0 every time anyway, you know it will continue to repeat forever. So instead of writing 0.33333333, we change it to 0.3 or 0.33 with a line over it. That line tells us that the decimal continues to repeat. I'm going to ask you to solve these two problems. One of them, well, neither are repeating decimals in this case, and that's okay. First one is 7/8. Please turn that into a decimal, and then turn 3/15 into a decimal. I'll give you a little time to work on that, and while I'm working on it, I'm going to explain how we go from decimals to fractions. Decimals to fractions is extremely easy. If you look at the decimal I wrote here, 25 hundredths, notice the place value I said. I said hundredths, 25 hundredths. 25 over 100. So what you do when you take your decimal is you take the number that is behind the decimal and you put it over that last place value, which in this case was the hundredths. So it's 25 over 100, and we could simplify that because we know 25 goes into both of them, and that becomes 1/4. Alright, I'll give you another minute to finish those conversions from fractions to decimals. And again, if you look at some of these fractions, like you'll notice 3/15 is not in simplest form, there are lots of equivalent fractions. Those equivalent fractions will end up having the exact same decimal that they convert into. So for example, we did 3/4 before, same thing as 6/8. 6/8 would also turn into 75 hundredths. 9/12 would also turn into 75 hundredths. Every equivalent fraction will turn into the same decimal. That's not going to change. Alright, that's been enough time. Let's take a look at our problems. 8 doesn't go into 7 like we've seen in all these problems, but you put decimal up, you add the 0, and you continue on through. 8 goes into 78 times, you do your multiplication and your subtraction, and you get 6. Drop the 0, 8 goes into 67 times, your multiplication and your subtraction, you get 4. 8 goes in, and then drop the 0, 8 goes into 40, 5 times, that's even. 8, and then you do your multiplication, your subtraction, you're left with 0. Perfect. So 7 over 8 is really 875 thousandths. Same thing as 7/8. For 3/15, that one's a really simple one. Once you've added your decimal, you'll notice the number is now 30. Well, 15 goes into 32 times, evenly, and we're done. So it was just 2/10 is the same thing as 3 over 15. You guys have now successfully converted fractions into decimals. Yay! Good luck.